Hello, I'm Dennis McCuistion, and welcome to Perspectives Matter. And boy, do perspectives matter on vaccines, especially those dealing with the COVID issues of the past 5 years. Now, I promise you, you'll leave this program with a near complete understanding of the history, evolution, implementation of the mRNA vaccine. We'll discuss safety issues, ethical considerations, mandatory vaccinations, the controversy in public health and public policy, and the challenges in communicating facts in a media environment where it's increasingly difficult to have confidence in what you hear. And there's no one better to discuss this topic than the controversial figure himself, Dr. Robert Malone. He's a biochemist who was personally involved with the pioneering studies of messenger RNA technology, along with Philip Fellner and others, and was the first author on a 1989 paper detailing the process. He holds numerous patents, was outspoken about his concerns regarding the safety and efficacy of COVID-19 vaccines, and he's the Chief Medical and Regulatory Officer of the Unity Project, and was just named 2 days ago by Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who's the Health and Human Services Director, as a new member of the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices. And Dr. Malone, I guess I should congratulate you on that. So is that a good thing?
Yeah, to be honest, it's a be careful what you wish for because you might get it moment. My position on that is that I'm grateful to Secretary Kennedy for the opportunity to serve my country in this way. My position has been that I don't seek a federal appointment. I'm not somebody who's seeking influence or political power, but I welcome the opportunity to serve my country, and I will do so to the best of my ability and focus on things like integrity, transparency, scientific rigor, while always keeping in mind that we have parents, particularly young parents, that now in a world where government policy is being actively questioned, they face extremely difficult decisions. And furthermore, there are vaccine injured. And there are vaccine injured from traditional vaccines. No drug is perfectly safe. And there are vaccine injured from the COVID products. And I am of the opinion that they need to be acknowledged. They need to be made whole to the best of the ability, particularly those that were subjected to mandates and didn't have truly informed consent, which is one of the foundations of medical ethics, particularly for an experimental product.
Well, I guess one of the things that you talk about and that we talk about as part of the media is, what is that person supposed to believe? I mean, they read this, they read that, they read this, they read that, and then they read the people who are knocking the people who are doing this. I called you a controversial figure because it seems like the, quote, mainstream media, or the Dr. Fauci's and other folks like that, have tried to, let's say, question, I guess they questioned your integrity as well as questioning whether you knew what you were talking about. So let me just get through some of this. First of all, are you an anti-vaccine person?
So that's nuanced. It's hard to make everything nuanced, but that's the way the world is now. Everybody has their own opinion about things. So if we go to Webster's dictionary, we find that the term anti-vaxxer, which is a synthetic term, it's been created, it's been weaponized for political objectives. It used to be used as a pejorative to describe people of a certain orientation, and there are people who are absolutely convinced. Often these are people that have children that have they believe are vaccine damaged, and they are absolutely convinced that all vaccines are bad and there shouldn't be any vaccines. That is one school of thought. Right. And that's what traditionally used to be called an anti-vaxxer. Then there's the new broadened definition in Webster's that anyone who is opposed to vaccine mandates is an anti-vaxxer. Now, in that broadened definition, I'm somebody who comes from a more libertarian frame of reference, and I believe that patients should have rights. These include the right to informed consent, and that patients have the right to determine what procedures they receive. This is a fundamental principle in medical ethics. If you want to have a colonoscopy, you might have been asked about that at some point in your life, as have I.
Yes.
You'll recall that the practitioner goes through a lengthy discussion of potential risks associated with that procedure in order to allow you to make a reasoned decision about whether or not you're willing to accept those risks in order to have the benefits of that procedure. So it's a norm in medical practice, and I believe that it should be a norm in vaccine medicine.
Okay, so let me stop you right there and say this. Then there are a lot of vaccines you would agree have done a great service, smallpox, other things like that, in the public health sphere. Am I right about that? Or
There are vaccines which are effective when used in the right context.
All right.
A great example is yellow fever.
Okay.
Yellow fever is actually a pretty nasty vaccine. It's a live attenuated. It's kind of a weakened yellow fever virus. If you take too many doses of it, it can kill you. It will give you yellow fever, which is a lethal disease. But if you are going to be in the jungles of Brazil, exposed to yellow fever, you would be pretty stupid not to take that vaccine, or pretty bold, or willing to take risks. However, you mentioned smallpox. We certainly have had smallpox outbreaks, and now smallpox per se is eradicated because it doesn't have an animal host. So that's one of the great successes. We also have other vaccines that are live attenuated.
Polio?
And measles.
Measles.
Mumps is another one.
Yeah, and they got a bunch of measles outbreaks in Texas now, as you probably have seen.
As I know, and I've been active in discussing those cases, particularly the two cases of the children that have died, the young girls.
Right.
And from my understanding of the medical records, the young girls actually died of medical mismanagement. They died of in one case, a mycobacterial pneumonia, and the other case, a hospital-acquired E. coli pneumonia. They didn't actually die of measles pneumonia. They died of bacterial complications, and that could have been prevented had they been administered antibiotics in a timely fashion. So that's kind of the nuance that the media misses. But in terms of vaccines, let's just, we need to be honest with people. Vaccines are not a magic wand. Like all drugs, they have risks and benefits. And what that means is it's appropriate that they should be used selectively where they can do demonstrable good, or they should be recommended to children, adults, where they can be used effectively, but not oversold.
Right.
We don't need marketing. This is, like the entire pharmaceutical industry, the pressure of modern marketing and all the capabilities around it to sell us stuff.
Television everywhere, everything's a drug, isn't it?
And well, the pharmaceutical industry does capitalize both much of our political activity.
Lobbying in Washington, the most number of lobbyists and all that stuff.
And much of broadcast media.
All the time, of course. We know that, except for this program, I want to tell you that. Now, we don't have any advertisers. Now, so let me ask you this. You were involved, instrumental in what's called the mRNA, am I right?
Yeah, and let's just disambiguate that, because a lot of the people listening may see this acronym, because that's what it is, it's an abbreviation,
right,
as something kind of scary.
Uh-huh.
So what is mRNA? Did I invent mRNA? No, God invented mRNA. mRNA is a part of your body, natural mRNA. Now, a little nuance aside, these products, these COVID products that we call vaccines, that that use this technology, are they actually natural mRNA? The answer is no. They're a synthetic molecule that has a chemical in it called a modified pseudouridine that makes them very different from natural RNA. They have different characteristics. The material lasts for a long time in your body, whereas natural RNA degrades rapidly.
Well, I'm going to stop you right there because I heard you say on stage yesterday that one of the biggest problems with this was that originally the mRNA that you're talking about would be in as a vaccine and then out of your body right away, as opposed to, did I hear 700 days for some time?
So the new data from Yale University demonstrates that the spike protein, which is in the jargon of gene therapy, and this is a gene therapy technology applied for vaccination, as is the adenovirus vectors, the J&J and AstraZeneca products. Those are gene therapy technology used for vaccines. Okay, so let's just be clear about that. It's very explicit. So the payload is the jargon, the thing that the product, the genetic transfer makes your body manufacture. It's called the payload. And the payload in the case of these products is a modified, it's not the natural, spike protein. It's modified so that it's locked into an open conformation as opposed to a closed conformation. And that there's scientific nuance for the reason for that, that's beyond here. But that modified genetically engineered spike protein that the pseudo mRNA causes your body to manufacture is now being detected up to 700 days after inoculation. Okay,
so would that be good that I've still had it for 700 days
no,
so I won't get it again?
No, actually, the immune system is not that straightforward. More is better. You might think it is.
I mean, it sounds good.
Right.
Yeah.
More is better, right?
Yeah.
No, not necessarily so. In the case of the immune system, chronic overstimulation can cause a downregulation. Okay, so it's not good to continue to bombard, and it makes sense. If you're encountering a foreign antigen, meaning it's a protein or peptide or carbohydrate or something that's different from what your body makes, like in your food.
Right.
Okay? And you're being exposed to it on a daily basis
All
at
the
high
time.
levels. If your immune system then turns up the knob and says, oh, we got to fight this thing because it's different, and you continue to feed it this thing, and it continues to turn up the knob, that basically is what we might call autoimmune disease. It's one of the paradoxes of the immune system.
Does that lead to what is termed long COVID? Is that part of that, or is that something different?
So long COVID is kind of a functional description of a set of symptoms that some people, including myself, experience after they've had a primary infection with SARS-CoV-2. Okay? And it's kind of a loose aggregate of things. It's not really, and COVID disease really is pretty amorphous. It has a lot of overlap with flu and many other upper respiratory diseases, and but it has some things that are a little bit different, like loss of sense of smell, for example. But long COVID is this kind of chronic cluster of symptoms, and this chronic cluster of symptoms that some people experience after having the virus infection almost completely overlaps with a similar cluster of symptoms that some people, not all, experience after they have received these products, and particularly those that have received multiple doses of these products.
Right. Okay, so very quickly now, how did this COVID virus come about? Leak from some Wuhan lab? Bat? What?
So that's another point of contention and controversy throughout the COVID crisis period that began in late 2019. Now we have good documentation that there was a concerted effort to promote one storyline, one narrative about the origin of the virus over another narrative about the origin of the virus. There was a clear, concerted effort to promote the narrative that the virus was of natural origin. But that was contradicted by examining the sequences, by the geography of the supposed bat or pangolin, or they went through a series of species that they were hypothesizing that were quite distant from the Wuhan Institute of Virology and the wet market, which is adjacent to the Wuhan Institute of Virology. And there was, for instance, if it was coming from people that were catching bats or pangolins or whatever that they were going to sell in Wuhan in the wet market, then you would expect that you would see a pattern of crossovers into the population along the routes, the transportation routes leading into Wuhan, and you don't see that.
Don't see that, okay.
There's a number of other kind of circumstantial evidence that is inconsistent with the natural origin theory, whereas we now have very strong documentation that this virus has genetic characteristics consistent with having been engineered. And we also have the paper trail now of funding of the Wuhan Institute of Virology as testified.
You're not telling me that the government might have covered some of these things up back then, are you?
You're obviously being facetious. And the evidence is that there was a very active manipulation of the narrative that is now blowing back on the journals that participated in this, what we now would reasonably call a propaganda campaign. Tulsi Gabbard's has a commission that is revisiting the issue of the origin. The House has investigated the origin, and it is now much more widely accepted that the origin had to do with a laboratory source. There's no way, and I haven't seen any information that allows me to draw a conclusion about whether it was an intentional or an unintentional release. Personally, as somebody who's worked in a primate research center at Davis, I find it logical and certainly consistent with what we do know that this was an unintentional crossover into laboratory personnel that resulted in infection of third parties in the general region. But there is a counter narrative that has not been disproven that that narrative relies on the thesis that the virus first entered the population in Wuhan in late 2019. But there is a body of evidence that suggested that it was first noticed in the population around the military games that occurred much earlier in that year. So that does, there's a cloud of ambiguity over the virus origins, intention, lack of intention. We have clear documentation of inadequate laboratory containment practices at the Wuhan Institute of Virology. We have clear documentation of the CCP and the People's Liberation Army intentionally covering up evidence.
I just want you to know I'm shocked.
I am sure you are, that there's gambling in Rick's Cafe.
By the way, I was in Rick's Cafe in Casablanca 2 months ago, so I want you to know I was shocked at the time. Okay, let me stop you there for a second. So, in your opinion then, did the vaccines that were developed apparently so quickly, should they have been mandatorily put into everybody, or were there other things like ivermectin, let's say, and other things that would have worked just as well and much more safely?
Ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, various steroids. So this is another central point of contention.
Right. Yeah, the reason I asked that is because some friends of mine got COVID fairly early on, and they ended up going and taking ivermectin, and they were done in 2 or 3 days, and they just, said, what was all this shot stuff? I had to have the shots because I moved to France. They wouldn't let me move. They wouldn't let me get on an airplane. Otherwise I probably would have done what they did. So where are we on that?
So I was a leader in organizing the first international conference on early drug treatment for COVID that occurred literally in the Senate in Rome, the Italian Senate. So who would not, and I actually visited the Vatican at that time and spoke with Archbishop Turkson, who was on point for the Vatican for COVID, about early treatment, and Cardinal Turkson, Cardinal Turkson shared with me that there was an anti-inflammatory remedy, he's African, in Africa that he knew of, that he carried with him, that was also effective. So one of the things that was revealed in that very early conference was that brought together physicians from literally all over the world that were providing early treatment, was that if one administered a wide range of agents, we just know about a subset. For instance, you've never heard of the ones that I worked on,
right,
which was famotidine, celecoxib, plus or minus ivermectin, that was advanced by the U.S. military, in large part with my support and assistance. But I never made a big fuss out of that because I got caught up in the whole vaccine thing and everybody got focused on ivermectin. But there are many agents that, and this is the key, is you have to give them in adequate doses early on. And there are many different ways to keep you from experiencing the more severe second wave of disease in COVID,
right,
in which your body gets overwhelmed by an inflammatory response to the remaining virus fragments.
right.
And that's what gets you really sick.
Really sick. Okay, did the vaccines then help? I mean, I'm told that first of all, I would think a vaccine keeps you from getting something like smallpox, yellow fever, et cetera. That's not what is that a vaccine should we be calling it a vaccine?
So that's another, that you're hitting all the controversy buttons, so you're well prepared.
You're the controversy guy.
You're well prepared. Are these vaccines? The CDC changed the definition of vaccines in the FDA to make it so that under the new definition, these products would fall within that definition, but the old definition, they didn't. So it's once again one of these wordsmithing
Again,
things.
I'm shocked to hear something like this.
So I was labeled as a liar by the Washington Post. I actually tried to sue them. Good luck on that. For labeling me a liar, for saying on the steps of the Washington Memorial in the Stop the Mandates protest that these vaccines are not working. They're not preventing disease or death.
Right.
And I was labeled as a spreader of misinformation and a
Right.
liar, et cetera.
Oh, yeah.
But it was self-evident to all of us at the time that was the case. Now, here's the key, and it's obscured by a lot of media. Nobody, the details are challenging for journalists that didn't take biology, but let alone get trained in medicine. But the emergency use authorization in lieu of licensing from the FDA were for these products to prevent disease, largely.
Right.
Okay. And they did not prevent disease.
No.
They reduced the risk of disease.
You didn't have it as severely
Okay,
for
that's
most people.
key.
Is that
okay?
the issue?
The severity, they were not authorized to reduce the severity of disease, but that became the fallback position.
Well, that's what
right? But
yeah.
that was not what they were authorized for.
Right.
And so when it became clear that they didn't actually do what they were authorized to do, then the narrative shifted
to what it really does.
And to what it appeared to be doing, which is reducing disease severity in a subset of patients over the short term. That was another one of the slates of hands, is that the honest truth, the data as revealed by the Cleveland Clinic, first off, they deserve the gold star for doing a study on their own employees, in which they looked at this question of the vaccine effectiveness, is the proper term, because this isn't a clinical trial, it's an observational trial in the real world. And what they saw was that for a short period of time after administration, then the vaccines did provide reduction in disease severity and disease incidence. But over the long term, like 6 to 8 months, suddenly they were observing, and here's another fancy technical word, they were observing negative efficacy. What does that mean?
Negative efficacy.
Negative efficacy.
That sounds bad to me.
The secret decoder ring for negative efficacy means it actually makes it more likely that you get disease at 6 weeks to 8 weeks. And that's why suddenly the government took the position, oh, you got to get rejabbed.
Yeah.
We need booster.
Booster.
Is because of this strange phenomena that over the short term you got some protection, and they emphasize that, but over the kind of intermediate term, you actually became more likely to develop disease, and furthermore, in a subset of people, and this is one of the things I'm being attacked for saying, in a subset of people that received multiple doses, they began to develop a sort of immunodeficiency, an inability to respond. But this is typical of high zone tolerance.
All right, let me stop you right there, only because we're out of time. I wish we had another 30 minutes, but we don't. So thank you so much for being here. Yeah, here's your assignment should you choose to accept it. I mean, you've heard literally from the horse's mouth, perspectives of one of the leading challengers to the so-called expert consensus. So now go do your research on other perspectives, and so that you can make the most educated choices possible. Join us on social media for more information on this and other important topics as we continue to talk about things that matter with people who really care.